Karen stole my baby at the park and tried to convince everyone she was the mother. It all started on what seemed like a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning. My husband, Tom, was away for work, leaving me to spend the day with our 6-month-old son, Ethan. The sun was out. The sky was that perfect shade of blue that felt like something out of a painting, and I decided to take Ethan to the nearby park. It's a quaint little place with swings, a duck pond, and benches shaded by massive oaks. It's my go-to spot when I need a moment of calm or, in this case, when I want Ethan to soak up some fresh air. The park was buzzing with life. Kids were running around, parents were chasing after them with varying degrees of success, and an older couple was feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks. I found a quiet bench near the playground, parked Ethan's stroller beside me, and began unpacking his diaper bag. A woman, probably in her mid-40s, caught my attention. She was dressed impeccably for a park outing. Heels, tailored pants, and a blouse that screamed, dry clean only. Her hair was styled into a neat blonde bob, and she carried herself with a strange air of authority. At first, she didn't seem out of place, just another passerby taking a walk. But then she stopped near us, tilted her head, and stared at Ethan for what felt like an uncomfortable amount of time. "Your baby is adorable," she finally said, her voice overly sweet, like she was trying too hard. I smiled politely, muttering a quick, "Thank you," before turning my attention back to Ethan, who was busy gurgling at the little stuffed giraffe in his hands. She continued, stepping closer. "He looks just like my nephew did when he was that age. Such a handsome boy. How old is he?" Her questions felt harmless at first, so I answered. "He's 6 months old." "Oh, how precious. You must be such a proud mama. Do you come here often?" The conversation started feeling a little off. Her questions were probing, almost invasive. I gave short, clipped responses, hoping she'd take the hint and move on. Instead, she leaned down to Ethan's stroller, cooing at him like they were long-lost friends. "He's such a happy baby," she said. "Babies are such a blessing, aren't they? I always wanted one of my own. But life doesn't always work out the way you plan." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Her tone had shifted slightly, still sweet, but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. I started feeling uneasy, clutching Ethan's stroller handle a little tighter. Before I could excuse myself, she straightened up and introduced herself. "I'm Karen, by the way. You're so lucky to have such a beautiful family." I mumbled my name, deliberately omitting any personal details. She lingered for another awkward minute before finally walking away, but not before shooting one last lingering glance at Ethan. Shaking off the encounter, I decided to push Ethan's stroller over to the duck pond. I parked near a group of moms chatting and tried to relax. Ethan was giggling at the ducks, and for a moment, all was right with the world. That's when I noticed her again. Karen. She was standing a little ways off, pretending to scroll on her phone but glancing at us every few seconds. The unease in my stomach turned into a full-blown knot. I tried to stay calm. Maybe she was just socially awkward or a little lonely, I told myself. But then, as I reached into Ethan's diaper bag to grab his bottle, I heard the distinct sound of stroller wheels. I whipped around, and my heart dropped. Karen was pushing Ethan's stroller, my son, toward the parking lot. I froze for a second, unsure if I was seeing things correctly. But no, Karen was walking briskly toward the parking lot, her hand firmly on Ethan's stroller. My body moved before my brain caught up, and I sprinted after her, shouting, "Hey, what are you doing? That's my baby." She didn't flinch. Instead, she picked up her pace, muttering something under her breath. A couple of heads turned in our direction, but no one reacted immediately. It all happened so fast. By the time I reached her, adrenaline pumping, she had almost made it to the sidewalk. I grabbed the stroller's handle, jerking it back toward me, and she finally stopped. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. Karen looked at me with a strange, calm expression, as though I was the one being unreasonable. "I'm taking my son to the car," she said, her tone laced with indignation. I blinked, completely thrown off. "Your son? That's my baby. Let go of the stroller. She tightened her grip, refusing to budge. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but this is my child. I've been looking for him everywhere. I'm his mother, and I'm taking him home. The audacity of her words knocked the wind out of me. Before I could respond, Karen turned to the small group of onlookers that had started to gather. She's trying to steal my baby. Someone call the police. For a moment, the crowd hesitated, unsure who to believe. Karen's performance was Oscar-worthy. Tears streaming down her face, her voice cracking as she pleaded for help. I could see some of the bystanders starting to shift uncomfortably, their eyes darting between us. No, she's lying, I shouted, my voice shaking. This is my son. Check the diaper bag. His name is on everything. Karen scoffed, her hand still gripping the stroller. Of course you'd say that. You probably planned this. You're trying to kidnap him and pass him off as your own. The absurdity of her claims made my head spin, but the crowd's growing murmurs of confusion snapped me back to reality. I reached into the stroller's basket and grabbed Ethan's birth certificate, which I always carried with me, just in case. Here, I said, holding it up. This proves he's mine. Karen's eyes flicked to the paper, but she didn't waver. Instead, she doubled down. That's a forgery. She's probably been planning this for months. Someone call the police before she gets away. The tension in the air was palpable. One of the onlookers, a man in his 30s, stepped forward cautiously. Maybe we should wait for the police to sort this out, he said, his voice unsure. Fine by me, Karen said, her tone smug. She crossed her arms and stepped back from the stroller, but the look in her eyes made it clear this wasn't over. I took the opportunity to will Ethan back toward me, my heart pounding in my chest. He was still blissfully unaware of the chaos around him, his little hand gripping the stuffed giraffe like nothing had happened. The sound of sirens in the distance sent a wave of relief through me, but also a flicker of doubt. Would they believe me? Karen had crafted such a convincing act that I wasn't sure how this would play out. As the police car pulled up, Karen immediately launched into her version of events, tears streaming down her face again. Thank God you're here. This woman tried to snatch my baby right out of the stroller. Please, you have to do something. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. That's not true, I said, my voice steady. She's lying. This is my son, and I have proof. The officers looked between us, clearly skeptical of Karen's melodramatics. Do you have any identification for the child? One of them asked me. Yes, I said, fumbling through the diaper bag to pull out his birth certificate and a copy of his vaccination records, both of which had Ethan's full name and my information. Karen's face faltered for a split second before she recovered. She probably stole those too, she said, her voice dripping with venom. The officer glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Do you have any proof that this child is yours? Karen hesitated, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her facade. I don't have it with me, she stammered. But I know he's mine. I've been looking for him for months. He was taken from me. The officer raised an eyebrow. And what's his name? Karen froze. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of the crowd's stares, the doubt creeping into their expressions. Finally, the officer turned to me. Ma'am, do you know the child's name? His name is Ethan, I said without hesitation. Ethan James Carter. The officer nodded and crouched down to Ethan's level. Hey there, buddy. Can you tell me your name? Ethan, of course, didn't respond. He was only 6 months old. But the officer's tone softened. He stood back up and turned to his partner. Let's take statements and sort this out back at the station. Karen's face paled, but she didn't give up. You can't just take her word for it, she screeched. She's a liar. But the officers were already escorting her to their car, and for the first time that day, I felt like I could breathe again. The police brought both of us down to the station, and while I was relieved to have Ethan safe with me, the weight of the situation was far from lifted. Karen, still in full-blown dramatics, sobbed and wailed the entire ride, claiming over and over that she was the victim. The officer driving seemed skeptical of her story, but I couldn't shake the fear that somehow she'd find a way to manipulate things further. At the station, they separated us to take our statements. I explained everything. Our interaction at the park, her bizarre fixation on Ethan, and the moment I saw her trying to wheel his stroller away. I handed over Ethan's birth certificate, vaccination records, and even a recent family photo on my phone showing Ethan with both me and Tom. "Why do you carry so much documentation?" one of the officers asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. "Because of situations like this," I said with a bitter laugh. "You never know what could happen." Meanwhile, Karen was spinning an entirely different story in another room. Through the glass wall separating us, I could see her gesturing wildly, her voice muffled but animated. She was pulling at the officer's sleeve like she was begging for mercy. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers came back to me with a serious expression. "We've run her name," he said. "Karen does have a history of unusual behavior." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean by unusual?" "She's been involved in a few incidents where she's made false claims about children being hers. Nothing like this, though. Mostly arguments in public places, grocery stores, playgrounds. But it's clear there's a pattern." That should have reassured me, but it only made the whole situation more terrifying. What if she had done this before and gotten away with it? Karen's delusions seemed to reach a breaking point when the officers returned to confront her with the evidence. "Ma'am," one of them said, his tone firm, "the documents she provided are legitimate. We've confirmed her identity and her relationship to the child. Do you have any evidence at all to support your claim?" Karen's eyes darted between the officers, her confidence faltering. I don't have it on me," she stammered. "But you don't understand. That baby is mine." "I know he is." "Ma'am," the officer said again, his patience wearing thin, "you've been unable to provide the child's name, any form of identification, or any proof of your claim. If you continue to insist on this without evidence, we'll have no choice but to charge you with attempted abduction." At that, Karen's demeanor shifted. The tears stopped abruptly, and a cold, calculating expression settled over her face. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "You'll regret this." The officers didn't respond, but their expressions made it clear they weren't buying her act anymore. When it was all over, they escorted Karen out of the building in handcuffs, charging her with attempted abduction and disorderly conduct. Watching her being led away should have been a moment of triumph, but all I felt was a strange sense of dread. What if there were other mothers like me who hadn't been so lucky? What if Karen escalated her behavior the next time? Tom came rushing into the station not long after, his face pale and his eyes filled with worry. He'd left work the moment I called, driving 3 hours straight to get to us. When he saw Ethan safe in my arms, his shoulders sagged with relief. "I should have been there," he said, guilt heavy in his voice. "It's not your fault," I told him, even though part of me wanted to collapse into his arms and cry about how terrifying it all had been. The officers advised me to stay vigilant and suggested a restraining order, which I filed the very next day. But even with that in place, the experience left a permanent scar. For weeks, I couldn't go back to that park. I found myself looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, jumping at the sight of strangers who got too close to Ethan. It wasn't fair to him. He deserved a carefree, happy childhood. But I couldn't shake the fear that someone else like Karen might be out there. Tom and I tried to settle back into normal life, but the incident with Karen had shaken us deeply. Even with the restraining order in place, I couldn't stop obsessing over the possibility that she might try something again, or that someone like her could be lurking around any corner. Then, a few weeks later, I got a call from the officer who had handled the case. "You're not going to believe this," he said grimly. Karen had been released on bail and immediately resumed her unhinged behavior. She'd been caught stalking another park, reportedly approaching several mothers with bizarre claims about their children. Luckily, the police were able to arrest her before she did anything more serious, but the whole situation sent a chill down my spine. I doubled down on precautions after that. I installed a high-tech security system at home, complete with cameras and motion detectors. I started attending a local moms group where we shared tips on safety and staying vigilant. It helped a little to feel part of a community that understood my fears. Despite everything, life gradually returned to some semblance of normal. Ethan celebrated his first birthday a few months later, surrounded by family and friends. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe and enjoy the moment. But the Karen saga wasn't quite over. One day, I received an unexpected email from a woman claiming to know Karen. She introduced herself as a distant relative and explained that Karen had a history of severe mental health issues that had gone untreated for years. "She's not evil," the woman wrote, "but she needs help, and no one in the family knew how to intervene." It was a lot to process. While I couldn't forgive what Karen had done, her relative's words made me wonder how much of her behavior was fueled by untreated illness rather than malice. It didn't excuse her actions, but it did add a layer of complexity to the situation. Karen eventually received a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation and was admitted to a facility for treatment. The news brought me some relief, though I couldn't help but think about the system's failure to catch her issues before she hurt so many people. Looking back, the experience taught me hard lessons about vigilance and the unpredictable nature of people. But it also reminded me of the importance of community, the mom's group, my family, and even the strangers at the park who eventually stepped in to help. Ethan will grow up hearing this story someday, and I'll make sure he understands how much he means to me and how far I'll go to protect him. Sometimes the world feels like a scary place, but knowing we're not alone in facing it makes all the difference.